What's up everyone, NanMan here, and we're going to do another modern meta breakdown video. This time, we're going to be looking at an updated list of Hardened Scales. Alright, so Hardened Scales has been around for a while. It was kind of the evolution of Affinity. Once Hardened Scales got printed, people started messing around with ways to kind of push it above what original Affinity could do. Affinity had that ability to kind of either go wide or be that kind of one big guy that could just kind of kill somebody. So Hardened Scales kind of took that idea and added on to it. Like, it has that ability with things like Hangerback Walker, Walking Ballista, where we can put a bunch of counters on these and either go wide or shoot somebody in the face with a Walking Ballista. But there's even more fun tools in here that make Hardened Scales so powerful. Now, why is Hardened Scales being talked about now? One of the reasons is it has started to shift, right? It's been mono green, it's been green black, and now we're getting into this kind of green white version of it. And we'll talk a little bit about why. And you can see above me, there are a couple of cards that are scrolling across. These are kind of key components, new pieces that have been added into the Hardened Scales list. And so we'll be talking about this. If this is your first time watching these videos, here's what we do. We kind of go through and talk kind of the ins and outs of the pieces of the deck, why these cards are included in there, what exactly they do, why you might be running these over other cards, and then we'll kind of get into a little bit about the sideboard, just to kind of give at least a snapshot for people that are new to Modern or not as familiar with the deck. That's what this video is about, is kind of educating and helping people learn a little bit more about what this deck can do. So you can see there's 24 creatures because it is a very much a creature focused deck. Now, original versions of Hardened Scales, we ran things like our animation modular, right? We also ran things like Arcbound Worker. These other pieces that kind of 1-2 drops that would be able to kind of add redundancy to the deck, kind of help progress our game plan a little bit more, where now we have better tools that work better than those pieces. And so let's talk a little bit about our creature base, right? We highlighted a little bit Hangerback Walker, Walking Ballista. Those are old cards. They're not scrolling across the top because they're so, I don't know, they've been around forever. Most people know them. You know, Hangerback makes tokens when it dies. You know, you can put counters on it. Makes a lot of sense. Walking Ballista, put counters on it, but you can take counters off to do damage to either creatures or players. So there is that kind of added benefit of, we'll put a bunch of our counters on this creature to be able to kill somebody. Now, the main shift to shift over into white is for 2 cards. The big one here is Esper Sentinel, allowing us to be able to draw more cards when our opponents are casting non-creature spells. If you're familiar with Modern, you know there's a lot of non-creature spells running around. So this is a really nice one. It only triggers on the first one. Most people should be familiar with it if you're familiar with Modern, or if you're familiar with running around in Commander, you'll be able to see it. But you know, there are those kind of Hammer Time decks that have been running Esper Sentinel for a while, so you know, this is nothing new in Modern to be able to see. Zabez the Glimmer Wasp, though, is the other addition here to be adding in white. So being able to gain flying until the end of the turn, you know, evasion is very nice in Modern. There's a decent amount of strong flying creatures that are running around Modern as well, so having flying is actually important. But this is that thing we were talking about, redundancy. Increasing the number of counters we're putting on things is the game plan of Hardened Scales. That's the whole reason, right? If one or more +1 counters we put on a creature you control, that many +1 counters are put on instead. So you're doubling up essentially the number of counters. This does the same thing, but specifically with modular. If a modular trigger ability would put 1 or more counters on a creature, you put that many +1 as well. So the reason why it's in there, there's 4 of, it's a legendary creature. It's going to be there. It's going to care about the modular. You're going to want at least 1. And hey, if you get another one out, they kill each other, sweet. You're going to move those modulars onto another one. We also have things like our Arcbound Ravager. You can see there's 2 different versions, technically 3 arts for it. If we include the promos, maybe 4 now, actually. Regardless, Arcbound Ravager, sacrifice an artifact, put a +1 counter on Arcbound Ravager. It also has that modular 1 as well. Now, the way it works, Arcbound Ravager can sacrifice itself. It can sacrifice other Arcbound Ravagers. So there's synergies that you can do with sacrificing a bunch of different artifacts. So as you can see, artifacts is the name of the game, and that's how we're going to be playing it. The newest addition, which is really, really cool to the list, is our Patchwork Automaton. Now, the reason this is now in here, and we've gotten rid of our Arcbound Worker, which was just a 1-cost modular 1/1/1 for this 2-cost, is because of the ward ability, and whenever we cast an artifact spell, you put a +1 counter on it. You can see our deck is full of artifact spells. There's actually only 6 that aren't really considered artifacts, if we're not including our lands in here, right? Ancient Stirrings, Hardened Scales, that's it. The rest are artifacts. So this should be able to be ticking up very quickly off of that. Plus, with our ability to put modular and move counters around, right, you can be able to make it even bigger. The ward is very effective because targeted spells and abilities cost 2 more to target our Patchwork Automaton. A little bit of extra protection in the deck is very nice. Speaking of protection, we do have things like Welding Jar to be able to regenerate an artifact, helping out in that regard. And if things still end up dying, we have things like the Ozolith, which is a huge, huge boon to this deck. So if a creature you control with counters on it would die, leave the battlefield, whatever happened to it, it got exiled, who knows, it's no longer on the battlefield, all right? All those counters that it had are no longer just boom, dust in the wind. No, it is now thrown onto this Ozolith, which you can then move onto another creature. The way it works is at the beginning of combat on your turn, if the Ozolith has counters on it, you can move all of those counters onto target creature. So there is some nice synergies where you can be able to one-shot somebody with Infect, because we do have access to Infect in this deck. Hence why I love playing Hardened Scales. But Ozolith is great. We're sacrificing things, we're killing things off, we're moving things around, doing a lot of synergies with that to be able to move it in there. Shadow Spear is in here, of course. Hey, who doesn't like lifelink? Who doesn't like trample? And then that little synergy of making sure your opponents lose hexproof and indestructible is also a little bit nice. But that's kind of the main idea of the deck. Now, I do need to highlight a little bit of our lands. Sometimes we just skip over the lands because, there's nothing too crazy. But it is extremely important to understand the Inkmoths that are in here. Now, you can see our land base is very green-white. Right, we do have some Horizon Canopies in here. We've got, of course, Rage of Earth Thicket. We've also got some Artifact Matter lands. Spire of Industry, you can tap for 1 mana of any color. Urza Saga is the biggest boon to artifact-based decks in Modern, right? Being able to make constructs, being able to search for artifacts that cost 0 or 1, and we know things like the Ozolith cost 1, Shadow Spear costs 1, we've got Zabaz costing 1, and then of course Hangerback, Walking Ballista costs 0 there. So we're going to be able to find a lot of great tools with Urza Saga. But the Inkmoth Nexus is the important one to make note of. So Inkmoth Nexus is an artifact creature, so we can be able to sacrifice it to Arcbound Ravager, right? We can be able to mess with it with Zabaz if we want to, because you can destroy target artifact you control with it, but that's not as relevant. But the Inkmoth Nexus, 1/1 flying Infect. Now, you can go that all in, old school Infect, old school affinity style of I'm just going to have one creature and I'm just going all in on this one creature, right? And it's very possible to do that by sacrificing a bunch of things to Arcbound Ravager, moving those over during combat and putting all those counters on Inkmoth Nexus, or using the Ozolith to be able to put all those counters on that Inkmoth Nexus and be able to just kill somebody in 1 turn. We've got things like Pendelhaven to help kind of buff up our 1/1s, because again, a lot of our things start out as 1/1, so being able to have that little added bonus is very nice. I like the idea of switching it from just mono green or green black into this green white version. Esper Sentinel is great, Zabaz is great in here, but I think the biggest plus is that Patchwork Automaton to the list. I'm really excited to see how this list is going to keep going now that we're having more tools, especially that ward ability is pretty nice. Sideboard, 15 cards, of course, and a lot of 1s and 2 ofs here. We're not running a play set of anything in the sideboard. It's a lot of artifacts that we can be able to take advantage of. Animation modular used to be in the main board, is now sideboard. That's again kind of that grindier matchup. We need this. If one or more +1 counters are placed on a permanent you control, pay 1 mana, create a 1/1 colorless servo creature token. So that is nice. Also, choose a counter on target permanent or player. Give that permanent or player another counter of that kind. Basically, you can proliferate. So lots of great tools that are available, relic, things like that, dampening sphere, void mirror, right? There's also some cool new things like Path to Exile that we get access to by having access to white that we normally would not have access to. So the Hardened Scales list is really cool. I've always been a fan of it since it came into Modern, since people were starting to play with it and adjust it back in the day when it was kind of green-black, and now it is kind of made some changes in progress and switched it up to a green-white version of it. But if you guys are playing the list, let me know what you think about the green-white. Do you think Zabaz is kind of the way to go? Are we running this? I've seen some people test out some kind of green-red versions of it, some just mono-green, ignore white altogether and kind of keep with those Arcbound Worker styles of play. Would you rather be playing that version or this version? Also, is Hardened Scales still effective in our current Modern meta with everybody running so many powerful grindy decks, right? Like the 4-color elementals, things like that. Let me know what you guys think. Do you think that Hardened Scales has a chance to kind of climb back up into the top of the meta? Or is Hammer Time the best use of artifacts in Modern? I hope you guys have been enjoying the video. Hope you guys liked all the content that I've been doing. Do want to remind you that we are now streaming over on Twitch, twitch.tv/TheRealNanMan. Mondays is our Magic content. Tuesdays and Wednesdays is our RTS content. So if you're all about strategy like me, come hang out, watch some cool games. We're doing Commander stuff, we're doing Modern stuff, Cube stuff, all kinds of fun stuff over on Mondays. But thanks so much for tuning in and watching, guys, and I'll see you guys next game.